Welcome to this presentation about a research-based approach to capacity building. My name is Karen Olsen and I'm a senior researcher at UNIP Copenhagen Climate Center, and I'm also carbon market coordinator for UNIP. Together with my colleagues Jay and Nicolas, I will explain what I mean by a transdisciplinary approach to capacity building for implementation of carbon markets in developing countries with the aim of achieving transformational impact. And by transformational impact, we define it as a fundamental, sustained change of a system that disrupts established high carbon practices and contributes to a zero carbon society in line with the Paris Agreement goal to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The photo behind the text on this slide is the UN city in Copenhagen, where we are located since 2014. I will tell you a bit more about our history and background, why and how we take this research-based approach to capacity building. The objective of this presentation is to show through two examples what we mean by UNIP-CCC's research-based approach in the area of capacity building for carbon market implementation. The first example is a master thesis that builds on an ICAT project, which is the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency. It's a case study that the master student Nicolas he used, and he has later written a journal article as part of his PhD project about an absolute sustainability impact assessment of a geothermal policy in Uganda. The second example is the SPARK project, which stands for Supporting Preparedness for Article 6 Cooperation. And here we have a community of practice that focuses on young academics for the development of sustained knowledge and capacity in partner countries. A few words on what a transdisciplinary approach is and why we take this approach to achieve transformational impact. The approach is inspired by the approach of the Swiss National Science Foundation, a program called Solution-Oriented Research for Development, where I served as reviewer of research proposals in last year, 2022, starting in 2021. In a nutshell, the solution-oriented approach to research and development impact goes beyond a problem-oriented analysis. That's where it starts. You want to solve a problem, but we don't stop there. Problem-oriented research is basic research, and we add a solution-oriented approach. The transdisciplinary aspect consists of scientists across disciplines and stakeholders across sectors, such as public, private, and civil society stakeholders, that analyze problems together for co-production of knowledge and transformational impacts. In context of UNIP-CCC's mandate to support developing countries, we work to develop international networks of researchers and practitioners that enhance the skills and knowledge for transformational impact to achieve the global goals at multiple levels: national, action level, project level. So a few words of introductions to the other two presentations. This first one is by me, and my background is that I am a senior researcher now, and I started my research career with a PhD in international development studies back in 2002, which was focused on the early days of carbon markets, the CDM, Clean Development Mechanism, with a case study in Uganda. So since then, I have supervised PhD and master students from an applied research perspective. I've also worked with Nicolas, and I was a co-supervisor for his master thesis at the Technical University of Denmark. He will do the second presentation and say a bit more about himself. what I find has been a very rewarding collaboration. Besides in general that it's very rewarding to work with young people when you are yourself a more senior person. It is a win-win collaboration where the young academics get access to case study data, extra supervision, time and resources, and it's also a benefit to project implementation to have fresh eyes from an academic perspective on the project implementation. So the first presentation is by my colleague, Jay Sterling Gregg. He is also a senior researcher, and he is co-lead for the community of practice for the Spark project. He also has a background from the DTU, the Technical University of Denmark, and is specialized in energy system transition, and he has a lot of experience teaching and supervising master students from DTU with an engineering background. So with these words of introduction, I will pass the word to Nicolas and then to Jay.
Hello everyone, and thank you, Karen, for the introduction. So I will now continue to explain the content of our research article and on transformational change. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Nicolas Desmoitiers. I was a research assistant at UNEP DTU Partnership, which is now the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center, in 2019. And I'm now finishing my industrial PhD with the company Tuvalu in France and my home university, which is also in France, École Centrale de Nantes, and the Denmark Technical University. My research lies on absolute sustainability at different scales and the links with corporate climate change mitigation strategies. So in this paper, in this research, we are focusing on transformational change, which is basically defined at multiple levels as a fundamental change by opposition with incremental change, and which has no normative connotation in itself. So here we followed the transformational change methodology from the ICAT, as Karen defined, which focus on reaching Paris Agreement goals, so in terms of climate objective, and more broadly to be aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So our research question here was how to characterize and quantify the potential of a policy or an action on a system to reach a transformational change. So to characterize this transformational change and try to operationalize it at the national level, we used what is called the donut theory, which is basically here on the screen combining the planetary boundary framework, which is here the outer circle depicting 9 key Earth system processes to delimit a safe operating space to stay in a stable state for the planet, and the social foundation framework, which is the inner circle here, which is basically defining a social threshold to reach to ensure that everybody has no deprivation, no social deprivation. So the most common, the most known planetary boundary is climate change, but as you can see here, there are 8 other planetary boundaries, and for the social foundation, it relates to the basic needs and also other essential human needs. So usually now there is a gap between these absolute assessment frameworks such as the planetary boundary or the donut theory framework and operational tools for decision making, for example at the national level. And here our question is how can this safe and just operating space donut theory framework can be used to help design efficient policies or actions to achieve this transformational change. So in this research, we aimed at developing a method to define social boundaries and to set minimum targets with regard to social sustainability. So the inner part of the donut theory. And we try to apply this to public policies on a national scale to low-income countries. So this was based on a case study work realized between 2019 and 2021. And we also combined it with a participatory approach where I went to Uganda, which is our case study in this research, which I will develop later. And we combined this with a complementary participatory approach, so making it transdisciplinary with policymakers, with private and public actors in Uganda, and also some local university researchers and students in Kampala. So I organized a seminar on geothermal energy and associated social impacts at the Makerere University in Kampala in 2019. And this resulted in already several research outputs, such as a case study in 2019, a conference in Kampala, Uganda, a report. This was integrated in a report from the UNEP's Transformational Change Guidance, and most recently, this resulted in a research article that has been published in Environmental Impact Assessment Review. So the method we developed to assess social impacts of a policy on a system based on absolute perspective, so based on the donut theory and its social foundation, was then applied to a case study which is actually based on a real draft policy in Uganda on geothermal energy development. So the situation in Uganda now is that there is around energy capacity is around 700 megawatt, and only 19% of the population has access to electricity to the national grid. So the objective of this policy here is to add 1,500 megawatt to the Ugandan grid from geothermal energy, which is a low carbon source of energy, by 2040. So a significant energy source to the country. So the first step in our methodology is to assess the social state of the baseline scenario of the system, which is, in our case, the Ugandan country. So absolute social assessment sustainability means that we assess whether there is some deprivation, social deprivation or not in the country. So to define this, we defined 15 social dimensions that are depicted in the first column of this table. We associated indicators to each social dimension, and then we defined some thresholds to define where we can observe no deprivation or when there is a deprivation. So for example, in the food dimension, we define that there is no deprivation when 0% of the population is basically undernourished. So this was based on literature review, on the donut theory, and on the theory of social human needs. So then we assessed the state of the country in Uganda for the social foundation first in our research paper, but also for the project we also assessed it on an environmental assessment based on the planetary boundaries. So for the social foundation here, basically, so this is a visualization of the donut theory. Basically, you are in the inner circle for the social foundation. You are at full deprivation for one social dimension if you are in the middle of the circle, and then the more you get close to the inner circle, the green inner circle, the less deprivation you observe. So social sustainability is where all social foundation reach the inner circle. So what you can see here is that there is no social dimension for which Uganda is socially sustainable. So now that we assessed the social state of our system, so Uganda, on an absolute scale, we need to assess the social impact of the policy on that system. So to do that, we developed a three-step process, starting with impact identification, then conducting a significance assessment, and then for the significant impact, the quantification. So we had a participatory and technical approach. So I conducted interviews in Uganda of various stakeholders to identify the impacts and their significance. And also we relied on literature, scientific literature on this topic. So this resulted in 50 identified impacts. 6 of them were found to be significant, so for energy, health, and work social dimensions. And for these impacts, we developed some impact pathways to actually quantify them. So these are the results here. So the gray area shows the potential impact of the policy on that system. So we can see significant potential impact in the energy and in the health dimensions, but also in the work dimensions. So this is a powerful visualization tool to actually visualize the potential impacts of a policy on a system based on absolute perspective. To show the level of deprivation there is before and after the policy is developed. So this social impact assessment could be combined with environmental impact assessment. So for example, using the planetary boundary framework, which also take an absolute perspective to provide policymakers good communication and tools to support decision making. But still it has some uncertainties. So for example, on the parameters, when you allocate a share of the planetary boundaries to a country, Uganda for example, you have a lot of ethical consideration that needs to be taken into account. Also, when you quantify social impacts, so develop impact pathways, you have such uncertainties that needs to be discussed. And same thing when you choose some indicators, you need to highlight the choices you made. So in our research and in our project, we recommend to build actually a strategy to deal with uncertainties and also to be transparent about them, and also to apply this methodology in iterative processes. So for example, it could be applied to other policies in other territories at other scales to show uncertainties and also to further improve the methodology. But still it shows some potential because of the transdisciplinary approach and the holistic assessment, so social and environmental impact assessment on an absolute perspective. So to support policymakers to assess how good policies are there enough or not? So this is the absolute perspective. And it can serve as a good communication tool to support decision making at different scales. So it could be applied as a national, sectoral, territory, or corporate scales, for example. So we learned many things in this project and research that, for example, it was very insightful to adopt a participatory approach and engage with local stakeholders, especially true with the social impact assessment, which really depends on the scale and on the local scale. Then it allows us to take into consideration different barriers of change, which are really important to consider when you assess transformational change. And it was very also useful to work jointly with researchers, so including local universities, so students and researchers in Uganda, but also with other stakeholders such as companies and public stakeholders.
Hi, I'll be talking about the SPARK program, supporting preparedness and Article 6 cooperation, and specifically the community of practice, i.e. COP-ASIC, within this program. The rationale of the SPARK program is to support developing countries in creating a strategy for handling Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. What is Article 6? Article 6 of the 2015 Paris Agreement outlines trading of credits for mitigation activities, so-called internationally traded mitigation outcomes, or ITMOs. There are many potential benefits to this mechanism. It provides finance for climate mitigation and sustainable development while providing flexibility for countries to meet their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. There are also some risks involved with this mechanism, such as overselling credits or selling too many credits in non-priority development areas. The SPARC program was conceived to work with 4 countries, Colombia, Pakistan, Thailand, and Zambia, to support them in developing a strategy for working within this mechanism. To do this, the SPARC program supports countries in developing medium and long-term emissions planning, governance frameworks, and prioritizing mitigation activities. The community practice, COP-BASIC, is a cross-cutting component of the SPARC program. It is a platform for knowledge creation, knowledge sharing, and knowledge application. One of the goals of the COP-BASIC is to build capacity in national research by working with academic institutions in each of the 4 countries. One of the COP-BASIC activities is to provide expert support to 10 graduate students from each country, 40 in total, over 5 years, and fund them to come to an international annual meeting to present their research. This raised the question, how do we locate qualified graduate students and what should their research topics be? After conducting exploratory awareness-raising roadshows in all 4 countries, we realized that there was a need to have national transdisciplinary networks of researchers across academic institutions in each country. This would allow for academics to link with government ministries, to prioritize topics and projects, and to allow for their research to support policymaking related to carbon markets. The academic network would then be responsible for selecting students to participate in the SPARC program and the annual COP-BASIC meeting. The initial roadshows were completed earlier this year, and the first meeting of the COP-BASIC will take place in June 2023, where we will discuss details on how to make the networks as effective as possible. The first cohort of students will be chosen later this year, and they will present in the annual meeting in 2024. The roadshow has been developed into a seminar series to better understand the national context, raise awareness, and inspire prospective students to consider how their research topics could be relevant to carbon markets. As carbon trading and markets for sustainable development expand globally, the objective is to build capacity through these academic networks to create the next generation of experts in these countries.
So at last, I would like to say thank you for listening. You can contact us via email, as you see on the slide, and you can find more information about SPARC's research-based approach through the link, and there's also a link to the open access journal paper.